All right, good evening, everyone. As you come on in, welcome to tonight's webinar. My name is Kali Cawthon-Freels. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a premium tutor here at Applerouth. I am incredibly excited to spend the next hour talking with you about one of my favorite topics in the entire world, how to become a stronger writer. So the goal is that by the end of our time together tonight, you will have a sense of why learning how to write well is important, not just because it gets you a good grade in school, but because it gives you an avenue for expressing yourself. It becomes a megaphone for you. Um, you also have some tools for how to practice writing, some activities that you can use, some brainstorming techniques, and hopefully just a sense of confidence that you can do this. You can actually take the steps needed to become a stronger writer. So just a quick overview of where we are going this evening. Is going to be a very full hour, and I promise to do my best to make to be respectful of your time. And as time allows, we will have an opportunity for Q&A at the end. So if you do have some questions that you would like to ask, please hold on to those and we'll take a look at those at the end of our time together tonight. So as we get started, I do want to highlight, what we believe here at Applerouth, our why, if you would, referencing that infamous TED Talk from however many years ago. So at Applerouth, we believe that when you change students' self-beliefs, you change their lives. So what do we mean by that? We believe very much in the power of self-talk. We believe very much in the power of student efficacy in helping students grow in their skill sets. And so we very much believe that what you believe about yourself impacts how you act out in the world. It impacts the way that you tackle different things in your life. For example, if you believe that you aren't good at math and math is just something that somebody is good at or they're not good at and there's nothing you can do about it, then why would that student work to improve their math skills? Right. So we want to equip students with the belief that they are capable of trying new things, of challenging themselves, so that they can grow in all aspects of their academics, which can have profound impacts on the rest of your life. Okay. So there are a couple different places that Applerouth helps students change their self-beliefs in a more positive tone. The first would be academic tutoring is kind of our first category here. And this is pretty squarely where tonight's conversation falls. So Applerouth provides academic tutoring for students K through 12, even into college. I have a couple of college students that I'm working with right now, and they are a blast. And we also provide support with students who are just maybe struggling in that one algebra class. This can also look like helping students with their AP classes or their AP exams, which of course are coming up very soon, 'tis the season. And just making sure that students have the skills that they need to be successful in those classes. The second category where we help students change their self-beliefs is in test prep. So this can look like college admissions, of course, ACT and SAT. This can also look like high school or private school admissions. So we're thinking about SSAT, ISEE, or for those of you in New York City, the Shazat, and other things like that. We also help students beyond college with GRE prep if they're looking to go into grad school. So just providing a lot of support there. And then the last category where we really strive to help students change their self-beliefs is through what we call executive function coaching. And our founder, Jed Applerouth, calls executive function kind of the invisible syllabus of school, the skills that come incredibly intuitively to some students, but not intuitively at all to others. So organization, how do you prioritize your assignments when you've got certain reading summaries due every day, but a big paper at the end of the month and three exams in there, right? Like, how do you balance all of that? How do you organize your materials so that you know where you've kept the assignments that you completed and turn them in, and other things of that nature that help students be organized and confident in the school setting. So we provide mentorship in that area and strategies to help students who struggle in those areas become successful in those areas. So tonight, though, we're focusing in on academic tutoring with our writing workshop, which is something that I'm incredibly excited to talk with you all about. Outside of Applerouth, I'm also an author, I'm a writer, and being able to share what I find helpful with my students is incredibly rewarding for me. So let's go ahead and jump in. So we'll start with the briefest of briefest overview of a history of writing and education, really starting around the Industrial Revolution. So when we're thinking about what's happening in the United States, there's a widespread understanding that literacy became necessary with the Industrial Revolution, because prior to that point in America, there wasn't really a benefit to having a literate workforce. Like you would have people come in, they would do their jobs, they would go home, and that was that. But outside of that, there wasn't really a benefit to teaching your workforce how to write, because it wasn't going to do anything to improve the business. Or at least that was the understanding, right? Like you need your workers to come in and do the work. Why would enhancing their literacy skills improve the profit of the company, right? But as our society has changed, writing has become an inescapable part of what we do daily in pretty much every industry um, imaginable. So if you're in an office setting, you're writing emails every day, right? If you're doing construction or contracting, you're going to have to write up risk assessments. You're going to have to write up an itemized statement of goods and services to your clients, right? Like even in industries where you think it's going to be very hands-on or very STEM focused or what have you, writing is part and parcel to what you do daily, right? And so what has happened though in our schools typically is in most cases the strong emphasis on grammar, like how we construct sentences, stops after around middle school for most students, right? I have had some students who are exceptions to that, but they're certainly not the rule. So once we get to high school, the shift for writing really transitions, or pardon me, the shift in your English classes rather shifts very, very strictly from grammar mechanics to reading and analyzing good works of literature, which is an incredibly important skill. Like having the ability to read through a piece, determine what the author's message was, identify the rhetorical devices that they use to make that successful. All of those are incredibly important skills to help us improve our logic and reasoning. Okay. So I think like when it comes to the lack of reminding students of grammar rules or how we construct sentences, how we organize essays and things like that, I don't highlight any of that as like necessarily a knock to what's happening in our schools right now, but just highlighting the reality that in order to prepare our students for success, there's so much that needs to go in. And with our English classes, oftentimes there's too much to reasonably fit in to a year-long course, and so something's got to go. And oftentimes what's got to go is grammar rules, refreshing those concepts. Okay, so our goal with what we're talking about tonight is to give you some opportunities or some resources to practice with, to make sure that you're taking some time to get those skills and have an opportunity to like use some of these resources. Before we get any further, though, we do need to talk about the AI question, because I know that for a lot of the parents that I work with, um, and a lot of the teachers that are some of my colleagues, like this is kind of a scary thing, you know? Um, is AI this new monster that is going to make cheating much more easier for students, particularly when it comes to stuff related to the humanities, right? Um, and I intentionally picked Frankenstein as our little picture here because I think Frankenstein's monster was really misunderstood if you've read the book. So maybe there's some stuff about this monster that we don't quite understand. I am going to go ahead and clarify here. I am by no means an expert in AI, no means an expert at all. I'm just going to offer some things that I've noticed with it with my students, and also highlight some trends that we've seen with technology throughout education. Okay, so the fear is that AI is the ultimate cheat. So I was playing around with Chat GPT the other day, and I asked it to generate for me a 5-paragraph essay on the role of women in the American Revolution, and it spat out a 5-paragraph essay, title and all, in probably 10 seconds, if that. So yeah, absolutely. If you ask Chat GPT to do that, It will do that for you. Should you do that? No, for a couple of reasons. One, because it's dishonest and it's not your work. I think that that's pretty on the nose there. But the second reason is this essay is fine. You know, there are definitely tells throughout the essay that this was not human generated. In many cases, it is incredibly overgeneralized. There's repetition in some of the phrases that you don't necessarily see because I only included the first paragraph here. Um, it doesn't include any citations. It doesn't include, except maybe one specific reference. All of the other references are incredibly generalized in terms of the examples that it's using to provide evidence to its claims. So, like, sure, it meets the metric 5 paragraph essay. Is it the best is it the best 5 paragraph essay in the world? Absolutely not. Would it pass the sniff test of most teachers? Probably not. They would probably be able to identify that this was not a student generated piece of material. Um, so then the question becomes, how do we use AI? Is AI a resource that we can use? And I think potentially, I think AI could be game changing for students who have certain neurodivergent traits and or learning differences. So let's say hypothetically, the student has been given the prompt to write an essay on an often overlooked part of the American Revolution. So maybe a pretty standard high school American history kind of a prompt here. For some students, having a prompt this unlimited is amazing. They are really intuitive. Maybe they're history nerds and they already have an idea of something that they would look at. But for some students, this feels almost like getting abandoned in an empty field. They're they could go anywhere, but because there are no signs pointing them where to go, they don't move. They're overwhelmed by the infinite number of possibilities. So using Chat GPT could maybe highlight some opportunities to give that student some direction. So I asked ChatGPT to highlight some overlooked details about the American Revolution that I could write about for my research paper. And in about 10 seconds, it generated 7 different aspects of the American Revolution that are often overlooked and talked a little bit about how they're overlooked. And then gave some guideposts for like maybe what students could do to research that further. And at that point, them doing the research, that's their work. They would then go off, do their own research, write their own paper about it, right? So when it comes to AI, we get to doing writing coursework, um, there are pros and cons to weigh with this technology and how we use it in the classroom. But debating the pros and cons of adaptations in technology when it comes to education is not anything new. This is something that we have done before over and over and over again. And I'm going to highlight the graphing calculator here as a prime example of this. Not to date myself, but I definitely remember hearing when I was in high school, in middle school more, I think. Um, our teachers would tell us in middle school that we couldn't use a calculator on our test because that was considered cheating. And they would always say something along the lines of, it's not like you're going to have a calculator in your pocket everywhere you go when you're grown up, you know, to which I hold up my smartphone and laugh at them. Not really. But technology advanced where calculators are everywhere. And when I was in high school, they started using graphing calculators more. Those became much more common. And so instead of completely banning the calculator, what changed was teaching us how to use it, right? How do we get the calculator to provide us with information? And at the end of the day, we still had to know the equations, right? We still had to know what information to feed it in order for it to give us anything of value, right? And so I know that this is absolutely not an apples to apples comparison when it comes to using a graphing calculator and us having to have formulas memorized and whatnot, compared to typing something into Chat GPT as a prompt. But I do think we will see similar conversations and similar adaptations. I do think that um, our teaching will have to adapt to how do we discuss AI when it comes to writing, and how do we teach students the best way to use it. So I think that's going to be more the direction we're headed in, because I think there are also some really interesting studies being done about would students use AI to cheat. Actually, the college student I mentioned earlier was working on some research with the psychology department at her university, and they're doing some studies on this right now, some research studies. And so far, the findings have highlighted that students who were already prone to cheat probably would try to use it, but students who view cheating as an issue of morals and that it conflicts with their morals, that they wouldn't do it anyway, right? So I think it's going to be interesting to see if those results get replicated as more and more studies like that happen. So we're still early with all of this. There's still a lot to see, a lot to learn, but I anticipate we're going to see some similar adaptations. So that is weaving into this conversation for tonight. Why should we care about writing? Um, Writing is, again, a big part of what we have to do in all of our industries. But most importantly for me, I think, writing is a fantastic way to help students find their voice. And to not just find their voice, but use it. And there is no amount of artificial intelligence that is going to be able to capture your voice. So for you to be able to articulate yourself, express who you are in the world, what matters to you, that is something that only you can do. And so I think for our purposes tonight, I want to encourage you to think about that. How can the skills we discussed this evening help you amplify your own voice? Right? So let's talk about it. Getting started with the writing. First and foremost, when we sit down to write, we want to know what the goal is. What should our final product look like or potentially do? And generally speaking, prose writing can only accomplish a few different things. They can tell a story, they can explain something, whether that's analyzing something or teaching someone how to do something, or they can offer an opinion. Okay. Um, so broadly speaking, all of our writing is going to fall into one of those three categories when we're using a prose. So once we've kind of figured out what we want it to do we want it to tell a story? Are we analyzing something, or am I arguing something? Um, we want to take some time to brainstorm and pre-write. You know, we want to take some time to figure out, well, what are the finer details of what I'm going to work on with this piece. Okay, so there's no one right way to do brainstorming and pre-writing. You may have some teachers who are very diligent or insistent upon doing an outline every time. And if you need to do it for that class, that's totally cool. But I also want to highlight a couple of different pre-writing tools that you could use if that's maybe not the most helpful for you. Okay, so first up is just free writing. And what that is kind of what it sounds like. You are writing free of expectation. You're writing free of worry. The goal is whatever comes to your mind, you put it on the page. And so if we're writing an essay about potentially the effects of AI on the future of education, we would write down every thought that comes to mind, like who would be mad, who wouldn't be mad, who would be helped, who would be harmed, so on and so forth. We would write down everything that comes to mind. And when we look at our free writing notes later, the goal is not to get every single idea from your free writing into your final product. The goal is to highlight the ideas that are the strongest and only take those and add those to your writing. Um, this is my go-to pre-writing exercise. I find that it allows me to put a bunch of different ideas out there. I can kind of visualize those ideas a little bit, and then I can see which ideas fit together. And I don't necessarily discard the other ideas. I put them in a different document. Those ideas that I don't use for this particular writing piece might be helpful in a different one. So I just kind of put those off to the side. So for some of you, this may feel really helpful. And for some of you, this may feel kind of like that analogy of standing alone in a field, right? We could go anywhere, so we don't go anywhere. We don't move. Maybe you need something a little bit more structured. So let's talk through that. Another way to do some pre-writing that is significantly more structured is by answering the journalist question. So who, what, when, where, um, why, and how. These are fantastic brainstorming tools because you can use them on any style of writing. If you are writing a short story, you can write down who are the main characters, what was the event, where did it happen, when did it happen, how did it go down. And that could be for a creative fictional piece, or if you're sharing a story from your childhood, same kind of thing. This could work with events from history if you're doing a research paper. This could be a fantastic framework for doing an analysis of somebody else's writing if you're doing, say, a book report or something like that. So this is very adaptable using the journalist questions. Okay, so we talked a little bit about outlining, right? So organizing ideas into headings and then doing subheadings underneath that. I typically like to make each heading, like the Roman numeral, one paragraph, and then the subheading would be the claim that I'm addressing in that paragraph, and then maybe an additional couple of subheadings to highlight the evidence that supports that idea, right? And so by doing it that way, you basically have this rough structure of what your final essay looks like, um, along with all the paragraph topics. So from that, it's just a matter of expanding that and filling in thoughts, adding whatever commentary is necessary to really flesh it out. But we also talked about outlining may not be the most helpful for you, and that's okay. Let's talk about some others. All of the ones that we've talked about so far are, with the exception of the free writing one, I think, are very linear, right? There's a process that you work through almost algebraically, if I could be so bold as to use another math analogy here. But they're not incredibly visual. And so I want to offer a couple of pre-writing and brainstorming strategies that you can do if you are a more visual learner. Like if you don't learn best by reading or you don't learn best by hearing things, but by seeing it, this can be a really helpful way for you to make sense of the information that you've been asked to write about. So the first is a T graph, because it looks like a lowercase t here. And it's like, I particularly enjoy this one if I'm working on a comparison essay, because I can make the heading the different things I'm comparing. And each row there would be similar kinds of things that I'm comparing. So like my columns are looking at Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, but then my rows are, we could divide that into animal, rodent versus fowl, and then clothing, no shirt versus no pants, and then temperament, friendly versus grumpy. And if you're putting more things in juxtaposition with one another than just these two items, then you could add another bracket on the end. So you could do Mickey, then Donald, and then Goofy on the end, and then fill in the appropriate things for Goofy as well. So this one, you can extend it as far as you need to add all the components that you're comparing together, and it still looks accessible visually. It doesn't look very clunky if you add more things than that. Another way that you can visualize it, again, works well with a comparison, is a Venn diagram. So the two circles represent two distinctly different things, but where they overlap represents what they share. You can do this with multiple circles. I do find, for me personally, and this may not be the case for you, that if I'm to the point where I'm adding more than 4 circles on this, it looks pretty jumbled. I think 4 is kind of the max for me, and that would lead me to choose a different visualization tool to help me do the comparisons, maybe back to the T-graph. But if it's like between 2 and 4, I think that this is perfectly fine to keep everything clear and see what all the different overlapping parts are. Okay. And then finally, with our visualization is a bubble map. And bubble maps are really fun because you can just basically add whatever different offshoots that you have. So if you're a little bit like me and like when you get a new topic, your brain kind of goes everywhere at once, this is a way that like visualizes that a little bit. So you would have one kind of central bubble with little offshoots going to smaller bubbles that are related. So like in the middle here, we've got automobiles, and then offshoots to car, scooter, truck, bus, and motorcycle. But then we would continue making the bubbles, right? So on the car bubble, I might branch off into SUV versus convertible or something like that. Or for the scooter, I might shoot off to manual versus electric or something along those lines, right? So like this can grow as much as you need it to for the essay that you're writing. And I think this is a great time to remind us that just because it ends up in your pre-writing does not mean that it needs to end up in your final product. So if you end up with a really large bubble map and you're just like, oh my word, how am I going to fit all of this into my paper? That's okay. The goal is not to fit it all in your paper. The goal is to find the things that you discovered in that pre-writing process, identify the strongest points of those, and only use those. And the other stuff, save it for a rainy day. It might be helpful on a different project. Okay. So now that we've gotten the pre-writing part out of the way, we are ready to sit down and just craft this essay, really start putting some flesh onto the bones here. We want to make sure that we're being purposeful. We talked at the beginning of this kind of writing process that writing can really accomplish one of three things: tell a story, analyze something, or offer an opinion. But within that, each of those things does something. It communicates a particular idea. And we want to be thinking about what is the end goal here? What do I want my reader to be thinking about at the end of this? So, like with a narrative, what should my reader take from the story? Is there a moral I want them to learn? Do I want them to feel a certain thing? Or maybe change a certain perspective? We want to think about all of those things because that informs the way we present the story. Okay, same thing with an analysis. What should my reader learn after this list of instructions, right? Is it clear enough for them to learn it? Or with an argument, if you're persuading someone, what are you persuading them to? How are you providing them the information they need to agree with you at the end of this? Right? So all of that informs the way we craft the essay. Okay? So that can sound a little overwhelming if you don't do a whole lot of writing, and that's totally fine. When in doubt, a three-pronged thesis is a great way to get started. It's a classic for a reason. It's something that they've been teaching in schools for millennia. Maybe not millennia, schools haven't been around that long, but they've been doing it for quite a while. So I have an example of a three-pronged thesis here. I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the next page because I've visualized it a little bit here. So the hypothetical essay that we're writing right now is going to be about reducing microplastics pollution. And so my thesis is individually, we can help reduce microplastic pollution by 1, purchasing reusable containers, 2, supporting local agriculture, and 3, making food at home. So by creating this three-pronged thesis, what I have done is already artificially inseminated my essay with a beautiful 5-paragraph essay structure. Right? So we would start with an introduction that introduces the idea of microplastic pollution and the problem that it poses, ending that introductory paragraph with my thesis. First paragraph would be about the first prong of my thesis. Second paragraph would be about the second prong of my thesis. And the third paragraph would be about the third prong of my thesis. And then I would want a conclusion to just reiterate what I shared with my reader. Okay. So if this is something that you've been doing for a long time, we'll talk about ways to kind of complexify what you write about and whatnot. But this is a great place to start if you're a little bit unsure of how to get started with a topic. Okay, which gets us into organization. If we don't have something quite as rigidly structured as our three-pronged thesis, because that gives us some pretty clear guidelines, right? So if we have a thesis that's a little bit more complex and the ideas overlap a little bit, it can be a little bit challenging to determine where I need to break up the ideas. Where do I need to add some paragraph breaks to help with the organization? Because those paragraphs help your reader track the flow of ideas. When you jump to a new paragraph, that lets your reader know that you're jumping to a new idea and they make the jump with you. Okay. If we write an essay that is just one giant block of text, it's much harder for your reader to understand where you're making the jumps and ideas. So, visually, paragraph organization isn't just helpful for you in organizing your ideas, it's important for your reader in making sure that they get your message. Okay, so when I'm working with students on on organization in general with their essays, one of the things that I'll do is I'll let them know that it looks like we have a pretty big chunk of text here, and remind them that one paragraph should, generally speaking, uh, touch one idea. And I'll ask them, where do you think you've moved to a new idea? And that is usually a good enough phrasing to like flip it back on them. Where do you change your idea here? That gets them identifying good places to break it up a little bit. So it's definitely not something that is intuitive right off the bat. But if you take a moment to assess what you're doing and say, hey, when have I moved on to a different idea? It's something that you can get better at. Okay. So when we're structuring our paragraphs, still in here, we definitely want to make sure that we are using effective transitions. So a transition, when I say transition, I mean particular words and phrases. So words like however, therefore, but, additionally, furthermore, on the other hand, those kinds of things. Because just like with our paragraph breaks, those phrases are incredibly helpful in getting your reader to move on to the next idea or to highlight where you're contrasting ideas. Okay. Um, Honestly, they might be some of the most helpful vocabulary we learn, um, especially because there's a lot of nuance in the kinds of comparisons that we make when we're putting two ideas together like this. Okay, so I'm going to throw something up on the screen here. This is certainly not an exhaustive list, but it's a pretty darn good list of transition words. So I do want to invite you for a quick moment to take a screen grab of this if you feel so inclined, particularly if you're a student on the call tonight. Um, because this is also a really fantastic opportunity for you to expand your vocabulary a little bit. So let's say you like to use transition words, but you use one transition word to express contrast all the time. Like let's say your go-to word is however. Look at all the different contrast words on there. Not all of them can be used in exactly the same way as however, but alternatively, conversely, could, right? So like there are several words in there that you could use as a substitute. So that way your writing sounds less redundant, right? So I want to encourage you again, grab a screen grab of this if you feel so inclined, or Google a list of transition words or transition phrases. But definitely keep this on hand and kind of take a look at your essays, see what your go-to transition words are, and see where you can maybe make some swaps, just to again like work on enhancing that vocab. Okay, so we've got our draft done. That means the paper is finished and I can turn it in, right? Absolutely false. um, and revision is a mandatory step of good writing. Revision is a mandatory step. I say that again because it's so important. We very rarely create a perfect draft on the first try. Like the day I do that is the day I'm going to go play the lottery because it just has not happened. Um, and unfortunately, I have students who will sometimes turn in papers that are underdeveloped because they only gave me their final draft. So if this is an essay that you've been asked to write ahead of time, you need to take some time to revise. And even if you are doing a timed essay in school, or say like one of the AP exams that's coming up, like it's important to practice your timing in such a way that you still give yourself at least 5 to 7 minutes at the end to review your work and make any necessary changes you may want to make, right? So revising is important. Let's talk about how to do it, because it can be intimidating to just read it over and over and over again and feel like, I know it's not good, but I don't know how to make it better. And it becomes an opportunity for you to just kind of beat up on yourself a lot of times. That's not helpful. That's not healthy and it's not productive. So when I go into revision work, I look for a couple of very specific things, both in my own writing and in my students. I make sure that I have a clear thesis, that my thesis is there, it's easily identifiable. I make sure that I include detail, that all of the claims I make are supported with evidence. I make sure that I've got that organization broken up well. I include appropriate transition words and I include sentence variety. That's a big one, right? I make sure that my sentence structures are diverse so that way it doesn't sound like this is spot, see spot, run, spot likes the ball, spot enjoys playing, right? If we have that same sentence structure all the time, it does feel a little bit boring. Okay. And then word precision. I also like to think of this as word economy, right? So word economy is the practice of using as few words as we can to get our point across without losing any detail, right? I've definitely like I was there in high school. I remember the times where our teacher gave us a writing assignment and we had a word minimum and I was only like 20 words away and I went back to see where I could add some really obnoxious adjectives. I've been there. And, I can tell you, it's not good writing. My teacher saw right through it, frankly, and marked off for it. But secondly, it doesn't do anything to enhance the quality of your work, right? So in that case, you would be better off finding another sentence to add, right? So we want to make sure that we're not sacrificing the quality of your work just to hit the word count. Okay. So when it comes to feedback, I know at least for me and for some of my students, it's really common to do peer reviews of papers where you and the whole class writes an essay as an assignment and then you are paired up with a classmate and you have to swap papers and kind of give each other feedback. It can be stressful to be the receiver of feedback, obviously. It can also be really stressful to give other people feedback because you don't want to tear people down. You don't want to hurt their feelings, right? Like I know I don't when I give feedback. Um, so I'm going to give you a couple of tips on how to give feedback to other people. It's also stuff that you can keep in mind when you do your own revisions on your own work. Okay. So feedback should be constructive. I feel like oftentimes we conflate criticism with just bad things, right? But to criticize something is to look at it holistically and to look at what it does well and what it does poorly. So I always make it a point to point out what students do well. You have a very clear thesis. It was easy for me to find. Your paragraph organization is spot on. I highlight what they do well because I want to make sure that they know that they're doing a good job. Okay. And then when it comes to identifying mistakes, this may seem counterintuitive, but I don't recommend pointing out every single fault in it because, first of all, some of those things might not be faults. They might just be stylistic preferences, right? The second thing is if you are told to fix everything all at once, I keep going back to that analogy of standing alone in a big empty field. You could go anywhere, but because you don't have any direction, you stay where you are. You don't go anywhere at all. By offering a couple, like a handful of very specific things that are like probably bigger issues, that gives the person receiving the feedback something much more concrete to tackle. So I like to focus on one higher order skill, which is like maybe the main idea, supporting evidence, or maybe even organization, and one lower order skill. So that would be like grammar, punctuation, spelling, that kind of stuff. I find that to be incredibly helpful because then the next time you write an essay, if you're in a situation like that, your teacher or if you have the same peer review buddy can go back and see, like, you can go back and see, like, oh yeah, last time we talked about making sure that you support all your claims with evidence, and you did that this time. Good job, right? It's easier to track improvement because you're focusing on one particular skill to improve instead of trying to improve all of them at the same time and losing track on what's working and what's not. Okay. All right, so now we get into probably my favorite part here, is how do we improve, right? Absolutely using all of these skills, but like with anything worth doing, practice, 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 practice. One analogy I like to use with my students, if they're athletes or performers, um, or anything along those lines, I'll ask them, what would happen if you only practiced your craft once a month? If you have one essay a month, right? What do you think's going to happen to your chops playing trumpet if you only practice your trumpet once a month? Or if you only practice your free throw shots once a month, you're not going to progress very far. And writing is a skill just like anything else. Um, and the more time that you spend on task on any skill, the more you improve on it. So it's a so this slide might be a little redundant. It's a skill that takes time to improve. And so this comes back to what we talked about at the top of the hour, Applerouth's why, really believing in this idea of a growth mindset. That if I view something as a skill that can be improved, not necessarily a trait that some people have and some people don't, then I can improve, you know? And it's interesting that this idea of a growth mindset actually changes the way that your brain works. This fun little nerdy moment for a second here. Um, One of my colleagues talked about how the way that our brain creates memory or the way that our brain learns anything is it's kind of like walking through the woods where there are no marked trails. If you walk the same way if you walk down the woods one time, your footprint's not going to make much of an imprint. But if you keep going down that exact same place over and over and over and over again, eventually you're going to wear a trail, a little dirt path. And the more you walk that little dirt path, the more deeply entrenched in the earth it's going to become. And that's what happens with our brains. That's what our little squiggly lines are, is those little neuron paths that have like carved themselves into the brain. Um, so with a fixed mindset, if I just continually tell myself I'm bad at this, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I believe I'm bad at writing, so I don't practice my writing. So then I turn in an essay that I'm not happy with and I get a bad grade on it, which then confirms my belief that I'm a bad writer. Right? That's just kind of this cyclical nightmare that's just not fun for anybody. Whereas if we look at a growth mindset, we approach it with curiosity. What can I learn from this? What are some things I can change next time? And in viewing it with more exploration, that actually creates new learning paths in our brain, new neuron paths, which is incredibly important for brain health, but also means that we are less likely to repeat those mistakes. So it's a game changer in terms of how we grow as students, how we grow as learners, how we grow as writers. Like this is applicable to so many places. But I really love seeing when this clicks for my writing students. Okay, so promoting growth as a writer, we got to practice. And so a great template is what I have affectionately called the 3 R's. I hope you'll forgive me for that pun and how I had to change the word right to get it to work. We can take some creative liberties here, I think. But a great template is what I call the 3 R's: read, write, and revise. Um, so first things up is the read portion of our 3 R's. One of the best ways that you can grow as a writer is by reading good works of writing. If you want to improve um, your memoir writing, personal narrative writing, read good memoirs. If you want to improve your persuasive skills, read good persuasive writing. You know, and so because we like when we see something that works really well, we can kind of analyze, oh, how did they do that? What could I add to my own toolbox, if you would, of writing skills here? And so when we read those things with the purpose of improving our writing, we do want to answer some questions about it. We want to answer some of the questions that are relevant to the goals of the writing that we talked about earlier. So again, writing can only accomplish one of three things: tell a story, analyze something, or um, offer an opinion, right? So we want to think like, okay, well, why did the author write this thing? Are they trying to convince me of something? Um, is this particular section focused on one thing other than the other? So on and so forth, right? So like this allows us to really see how they put together their essay and then gives us some information on what we might do to our own essay. So that was our first R was the read. The second air quotes R is write. In order to grow as a writer, we've got to write. That's just kind of the nuts and bolts of it. But my goal for my students is that it shouldn't feel like a slog, right? So there are a couple of activities that you can do to make writing a little bit more enjoyable. One practice that I did in grad school was something called morning pages, where basically it's the very first thing you do in the morning for like 10 or 15 minutes, and it is all stream of conscious. The goal here is just to get a pen to a piece of paper, again, like actually old school, real pen, real paper, so you're not tempted to go on the internet, and to just really get those creative juices flowing, right? A lot of times it might be nonsense because you just woke up and it's stream of conscious writing, but it's about building this habit and getting you used to writing consistently. Okay. And who knows? You might like having just woken up from a slumber, write down a dream that you had, and that dream might become a really cool story. You never know. Okay. Another exercise that I have students do, and I usually have them do this if they are reading something in school already that they're going to be doing writing about anyway, regardless of if it's like, their chapter from their like chapters from their history book, or if they're reading a pretty dense book like Jane Eyre or something like that. I'll have them do chapter summaries, throwing back to the original Twitter, which I guess is now just X, and have them write a chapter summary that is only 180 characters long. It's a fun challenge, and it's fantastic at helping students learn how to communicate complex ideas in a very short amount of space. So it's challenging, and I think it really stretches students. So it's something that you can do to practice writing a little bit. You can also kind of take a look at images like these and just kind of say, well, let's write a story about it. Why are they all looking at me? Also, this picture seems a little bit old. Have I time traveled? Am I a child? Or am I an adult in this picture? Have I done something really embarrassing? Or have I done something that kind of shocked them or made them sad? Because that one kid over on the right kind of looks like they're frowning a little bit, and just kind of like asking yourself questions about the scenario and then writing the answers to them. Similarly, related to this, there are a lot of great writing tools, even at places like Target. Like I've got a dice set that is for creative writing, actually. But if I'm just need to do some writing, I'll take that dice set and I'll roll it. There's a die that talks about the gender of the character, whether they're human or not, because this also includes like fantasy realm, a period in history, either way back in the past up to way like techno future type stuff, the kind of landscape it is in terms of like, is it a dystopian novel or what have you, and then some other traits about the character. So I'll roll all those dice. Sorry, I'll roll all the dice and look at what I rolled, and then try to craft a story based off of all of that. There are a lot of really great writing journals at Target right now that include some prompts, like just one sentence prompts, and then also some vocabulary words that they challenge the writer to include. So there are a lot of really great resources out there that you can do to be writing consistently. And the thing is, it doesn't have to be amazing writing. It just needs to be something to practice with. Okay, so here are a couple of prompts that you're absolutely welcome to borrow. What is an experience that you've had that you would like to do again? Or this one is a pretty fun one, I think. And you could change it. Your answer might change on the day for this next one. Who is a famous person from history that you would like to meet? Why would you like to meet them? So that's something you can go in a lot of different directions with. It could be like a personal reflection, or you can make a story about what it was like to meet this person. Maybe you all went to a coffee shop or something. Maybe it was someone from a long time ago in history, and the thought of a coffee shop is just completely mind boggling to them. How did they respond to that? Or did you time travel back there to meet this person? Lots of ways you could go with that. So for things that are a little bit more analytical, for our maybe non-creative writing types, because I want to make sure that we're taking care of everybody in the room, You could write persuasive essays based on these statements and just whether or not you agree with them or not, and what evidence supports your reasoning. So do we agree with actions speak louder than words? Yes or no? Too many cooks spoil the broth? Yes or no? Or all things good come to those who wait? Yes or no? So you could really craft some arguments based off of that, and it be a little bit less of that kind of creative writery type and just be a little bit more analytical. But I do want to address the asterisks at the bottom here. For my high school students, if possible, I want to push them beyond binary thinking, just the thinking that these answers only have yes or no responses. Um, there are a couple of reasons for that. One, because life is very rarely that black and white, but also because when we think about AP exams that many of these high school students might be taking, I work with students on the AP language exam, and one important part of the grading rubric for their free response questions is a point for something called sophistication. And the sophistication point is all about recognizing tension across multiple viewpoints related to the issue. A student who gets the sophistication point is a student who realizes that this issue is complex, it's multifaceted, there are a lot of different ways that you could argue it that are more nuanced than simply, yes, I agree, or no, I don't. So, for example, one of the examples from the previous slide, all good things come to those who wait. My argument for that would be that context matters. For baking a cake, it's good to wait until it's finished baking, and that is a good thing. But during a race, I need to go when the ref says go. If I wait, then I'm going to blow my shot in terms of that race, right? And so with my high school students, when it comes to persuasive essays in particular, I really encourage them to think, what's the tension across the viewpoints? Is this true in every context? What would other people who disagree with you say about it, and how would you respond to them? Because that allows them to craft something that is just so much richer, much richer. And if they're taking those AP classes, it's going to help them secure that sophistication point. Another fun exercise is to ask a student to explain how to do something, right? If you want to gamify it a little bit for any of your younger students, one of the funnest activities I've done with my younger students is to have one student write out a set of instructions, usually for something like how to make a PB&J sandwich. And then I will have them read their instructions to me, and I will make a PB&J, but following their instructions as literally as possible. I won't fill in the gaps for if they miss steps. And it gets very humorous very quickly. But it also shows them what they missed, right? So you can go back and kind of tweak it a little bit. So things like that can be a way to make it a little bit more fun for some of your younger students or some of your young at heart students. Let's be real. I've done that with middle school kids and high school kids, and they found it really hilarious. Um, but it's also a really good way to see, like, do students have gaps in their thought process? Okay. And then last but not least, that third R is revise. Even the stuff that we write for fun, it's good to go back and look at later to see what ideas we liked and what ideas we didn't, and to see what ideas we would change. And so some of that stuff, I think it's important to get feedbacks on as well, especially if it's something that you plan to develop into a piece later on. But at the end of the day, the biggest thing that I can say is keep writing. Writing is a skill that you can always improve upon, no matter how long you've been doing it. It's something that I continually try to improve on myself. And I find that as I continue to grow as a writer, I find more tools that help my students. Um, but it's something that will help you no matter where you are in life. If you're a student right now, K through 12, if you're in college right now, if you're a parent even, writing is just one of those skills that we need to be successful in this world, and also a skill that we need in order to really live into who we are in the world. So at the end of the day, no matter what, just keep writing is the biggest advice that I can give. So we will move to Q&A in just a moment. As folks get their questions together, I do want to highlight a couple of offerings from Applerouth here. In keeping with tonight's theme, I do want to highlight our writing curriculum. We have put together a really fantastic piece of curriculum that helps students review grammar rules while also instructing them on various kinds of writing. I've used it with several students, and it is fantastically not dull and adaptable for multiple grades. So if you are interested in learning more about that, I've got the phone number on the screen. I would encourage you to speak with one of our program directors, and they can tell you a little bit more about what that writing curriculum looks like. I also want to highlight the executive function coaching I highlighted at the beginning of our time this evening. If you have a student who just is a little overwhelmed by that invisible syllabus of school, the organization, learning how to prioritize, learning how to study, how to stay on task, all of that good stuff. We would love to talk with you about that as well. It's a pretty comprehensive process. You would do a quick little assessment that highlights what your students' strengths and weaknesses are. You would get matched to a coach based off of those strengths and weaknesses, and the coach would work with you on developing a plan for your students. So it's a really cool process. I wish I had a better word than cool, but it just is. So I want to encourage you to give us a call if that is something that piques your interest as well. And it would be remiss of me if I did not also mention that we know that AP season is here. We have a lot of fantastic AP review opportunities or one-on-one tutoring opportunities as well. You can call that same number at the bottom of the screen to learn more about how we can support you or your student through AP season. Okay. All right. So that gives us a couple minutes for Q&A here. Let me check in here. I don't see any open questions, but so I will give it a minute though, because I do want to make sure I don't miss anybody. And you're absolutely welcome to ask questions related to anything we've touched on this evening. All right, fantastic. So we have a wonderful question in the chat here. What tips do you have for vagueness in digging deep into your ideas? That's a really good one. So this idea of like developing your ideas. So I like to remind my students that whenever you come to a writing situation, you often have more context in your head than your reader does, right? Because you're in your head putting the idea together. And so you know all the steps that you went through to get to that statement that you made. Your reader is not privy to that at all. So what I suggest is add some of those things, right? To bring your reader into that line of reasoning of how you got there. So that's one thing that I would start with. There are also some exercises that you could do, right? So one exercise that I would suggest is the writing the instructions to somebody. It could be like making that PB&J sandwich that I mentioned, writing those step-by-step instructions, because I think that will highlight for you very clearly what is that internal context that you haven't shared, right? So, and it can be for whatever process you want. If you don't want to do the PB&J example, that's totally fine. But maybe it's for, I've also done it in a workshop where I've asked students to write step-by-step instructions for how to draw a dog, and then have somebody else draw the picture and see if it turned out the way that they envisioned and figure out what steps they left out, right? So like practicing opportunities for putting details into your writing and then getting feedback on how that detail worked is what I would start with. Okay. Let's see, we've got a couple other questions here. I wanted a book recommendation to improve the SAT. It doesn't have to be a specific book, but what kind of literary pieces would help with vocabulary? That is a great question. So first up, Applerouth does have our own curriculum when it comes to both ACT and SAT. So I would definitely recommend going to our website to check out our book. I might be biased a little bit, But I've been with Applerouth for about 10 and a half years now, and our book is the best out there, hands down. So I would definitely suggest giving it a look. And it includes some stuff with vocab and whatnot. If you're particularly concerned about vocab improvement, there's also a fantastic resource called freerice.com that offers vocabulary quizzes. I would suggest starting it on the normal difficulty level, and play it for like 10 to 15 minutes a day, right? And see over time how that improves your vocabulary. Okay. All right, so a couple more questions. We've got two more and then we'll wrap it up for this evening. So we've got under a limited, so the question is, under a limited specific word count, what are your tips for limiting being too narrative in an argument essay that requires a lot of context as it is a research paper? That's a great question. So first thing I would identify is making sure that I am not summarizing as much as I can. You know what I mean? Or if I do need to summarize because your teacher has not read what ever articles or whatnot that you found for your research paper, is your summary should be concise and short. If you need an entire paragraph to summarize one of your sources, that's way too much. You need to kind of shorten that down to a sentence at most, and then add your own commentary on that. Every paper that you write should be mostly your ideas. We obviously want to give credit to other people for their ideas, or else that's plagiarism, and we don't want to do that purposefully or accidentally, right? Accidental plagiarism happens. But we really want to limit the amount of summary. That can help. Another thing that can help is precision in your vocabulary. If there is a place where you've got 3 words that are saying something that you could accomplish with 1 word, see if you can start making some of those swaps. That would be another thing that I would suggest. Okay, so next up, we've got the ACT writing prompts are very subjective. What are your tips for establishing your claim with solid evidence in a rapid writing exam like that? Honestly, practice. The first time you do an ACT writing essay, if you're doing the ACT essay, I do want to clarify the ACT essay is optional, and only like a dozen schools in the country require it. Frankly, if you are not applying to one of those, say, dozen schools, I wouldn't worry about the ACT essay. It does not impact your composite score at all. And your time in your ACT prep would be better spent working on the things that do impact your composite score. You know, again, unless you were applying to one of those like 12 schools that require the ACT essay, but check with your admissions rep at those schools to see if the ACT essay is something that you need to be putting energy into. But when it comes to establishing a claim with solid evidence in a short time frame, a good place to start would be with the viewpoints that they provide you. You may well agree with one of those viewpoints, and if so, that gives you your starting place immediately. You may disagree with one of the viewpoints very strongly, and if that is the case, that also gives you a starting place very quickly, right? And so with that, you do want to make sure to reference each of the viewpoints presented. So that is also a way to get in some evidence because you're drawing from other places in that moment. But honestly, the best thing that you can do is practice. Practice identifying an argument quickly, and practice putting together your own thesis quickly. So in our ACT book, we do have several prompts for the ACT essay that I definitely would encourage you to check out. But honestly, it's just going to take some practice. One last question. Do you have any tips for the rhetorical analysis essay? So I'll give you kind of a quick nutshell on that because the short answer to that question is yes. I love doing AP Lang tutoring. And we are actually doing what's the official name for it? It's not called a final review, a strategy session. We are doing an AP Lang strategy session next week that I will be hosting. So I'll go ahead and plug that now shamelessly. And I'll go into some of these strategies a little bit more detail there. But the 2 biggest things that I would suggest for the rhetorical analysis essay is 1, use the journalist questions as your own outline for seeing how the author accomplished their idea. You want to identify what their thesis was and everything they did to accomplish, um, like presenting that argument. The second thing that you want to do in your rhetorical analysis essay, and I cannot stress this enough, is do not summarize what the rhetorical analysis prompt is. Like if you need to reference something from their really short quotes, right? Like phrases at best. Um, Try not to do a full-on sentence. But the reality is they want to read your analysis of it. And if you do too much summary, that's not going to score well. So those would be the two biggest tips that I would give off the top of my head for the rhetorical analysis question. But if you are interested in learning more, we've got a great opportunity next week. And I would also suggest checking out the AP course guide online. They make that available through College Board. And they also explain how the scoring works and what the rubric points are and how to achieve the points on the rubric and all that good stuff. So, all right, well, thank you all so much. This has been a fantastic evening. I hope you got something out of tonight. And if there's anything that we can do for you in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We would love to support you on your writing journey or any other need that you might have academically. So I hope you have a great night and a great rest of your week.